Welcome to Conversations of Hope, a podcast that shines light into the darkness of childhood sexual abuse. I am your host, Faith Ingraham of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I am Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. We are both survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and we're sharing our healing journey to raise awareness and provide hope and support to other survivors.
We know what it's like to feel all alone with our secrets, but we also know what it's like to find freedom. We are breaking the silence that allows sexual abuse to thrive and using our voices to empower and encourage those who have experienced abuse.
Our goal is to create a safe space for survivors to find hope and healing in community. Thank you for joining us.
So we're continuing our discussion with our husbands as our guests. We have my husband, Dale, and Michelle's husband, Anthony, with us. And today we're going to continue our discussion on the impacts of abuse on our relationships. Both of our families have children. And when we talk to our children about the abuse issue and how it affected our families and how we interacted with the offenders and different things. So this is going to be kind of a difficult topic, but it's one that we really need to discuss because abuse does impact the whole family and our relationships with those around us. I know in our family, I never told our kids that I was abused. And we actually had a somewhat normal relationship with my family, with my mom and dad. We would go to dinner with them. They would come to our house. They attended our church, so we would have interaction with them at church. We tried to keep our kids away from my dad and away without telling them. We wouldn't let them go alone with my dad and different things, but we didn't tell them that my dad wasn't a safe person. And we never really even I didn't tell our kids that I was an abuse survivor because I didn't think that they needed to know that. I was trying to shelter them from that. And I think I would have done things differently now.
Oh, yeah. We definitely would have done things differently now. But I think also it was a combination maybe of you don't want the children to know, but also a combination of nobody knew other than I knew you had been abused, but um, didn't know the extent of it till 2006. So I think you probably weren't even ready to process that. So I think it was a combination of things. But I want to do a little bit of a background with how we handled your dad's situation. We had absolutely no teaching in the church where I grew up, from our parents, from the Christian school I graduated from the Bible school we graduated from. Nobody talked about abuse. So therefore, nobody knew how to deal with abuse. So basically, we're grown kids. You and I get married when we're 23. And at that point, I knew dad had abused you. And I guess the way I chose to deal with it, and I don't know if it was a choice or just it was automatic, but the way a lot of people do, your dad had sinned against you. And then it was like I was operating under the hope that he had confessed that, repented of it, and it wasn't happening again. Now, that's a very naive and almost never true of an offender. The vast majority of offenders continue to offend. Some of the statistics are quite staggering. Most sex offenders do not have just one victim. So there was a lot we didn't know back then when our children were young and we were maintaining this, quote, normal relationship with mom and dad, or with Faith's mom and dad. We didn't let the kids go spend the night there, but I let him attend church. I let him and mom come and join church. Dad actually put my name. The last church I pastored was in Campbell, New York. We were there from 2000 to 2020. Faith's dad actually put our name in the church. So after we'd been there a year or so, Faith's mom and dad came out and joined. I would never let him even come in the doors of our church now if he was still alive. Knowing what we know now, um, there was really no accountability other than we try to maybe keep the kids safe from him. So we did a lot of things wrong back then that we did in ignorance. We didn't know the things that we should have known, and we didn't even understand the dangers. One of the things that I would say, talking about bringing it back to the kids again and their safety, I know for me, I tell people in our conferences that I was 95% ignorant about sexual abuse. The 5% would be I knew what it was. I could give you a definition of it, but I had no clue how prevalent it was. In a big thing I didn't have a clue about was that sexual abuse, sexual assault of children can happen in a crowded room and does happen all the time in crowded rooms at family get togethers, at events, and nobody has any idea except the victim and the offender. Many victims have told us over the years they would be sexually abused by an uncle or an older cousin or an older sibling at family gatherings. And some have been abused at the dinner table during the blessing because they happen to be sitting next to an uncle and he's sexually abusing them during the blessing that's being said over the food. And I know for myself, that would not even be on my radar. It never entered my mind that a sex offender would abuse a child with other people around. And in the daytime, you think, okay, this stuff's happening in the dark. It's happening in a closet or a room where nobody can see, nobody's around. So back then, as a parent, taking steps to try to keep our children safe would look vastly different than today. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't understand how prevalent abuse is. And this is one of the things that Anthony and I are talking about in this session, or we're talking about in this session, trying to keep our children safe. And what does that look like? And maybe some of the things we did wrong or I did wrong. In Anthony's case, wasn't even aware that Michelle's dad was an offender for much of the time, where I knew dad had abused Faith. I didn't know the extent of it. Everything changed after 2006. I mean, we tell people that's when God woke us up. Then we realized there were a lot of red flags. I did tell Faith after her dad came and joined our church, and I was around him like every Sunday and Wednesday night, I kept telling Faith, I know he's not repentant of what he did to you because I can tell by his actions, the things that he'll say, suggestive remarks that he'll make. And I realized then that he's not repentant. But at that point, I'm trying to decide, what do I do? And in 2006, when he abused his niece, then God woke us up and we told the church what was going on. And the church officially, we went through a process. The deacons met with him, concluded he was not repentant. So we officially voted to break off all fellowship and contact with him. And so everything changed after that. And it's been kind of an ongoing journey of where we're educating ourselves. We're understanding more about what God says in his word. But it is vital to keep our children safe. There's a lot of folks right now still in that naive place that we were. They're letting their children go to sleepovers and in places that are not safe. And they assume because somebody calls himself a Christian that they would never harm a child, and nothing could be farther from the truth.
And I think when we actually came out and I actually told our children that my dad, his latest criminal activity of abusing my niece, and then letting them know that he had abused me when I was a child, their whole world turned upside down then, because they had thought that my dad was a safe person. They knew that he had been a pastor, and now they heard that he was not safe, and their grandfather died to them that day, the day that they learned that he was an offender and he was not a safe person and he wasn't somebody that you could trust. And it really did have an impact on their spiritual life. They're questioning who God is. Is he even real? How can somebody who says that they're a Christian and even has served as a pastor, how can they do those things? It just threw them all of those questions that Michelle and I had as children when that trust was violated. They're going through, our youngest was 11 and our oldest was 21 and in college when we revealed this to them. And our oldest one that was in college, he said he was ready to quit college. He was going to Bible college. He was ready to quit Bible college. And he was even wondering if God was real. We didn't even realize that until recently he shared the struggles that he went through when we were dealing with the situation with my dad. So it's not just something you tell your kids and they're, oh, yeah, that's okay. We'll deal with it. It turns their life upside down because somebody that they have trusted and you have even indicated to them that this person was trustworthy because you acted like you trusted them and you acted like you could have a normal relationship. They didn't know what to believe anymore because now their whole world has changed overnight.
Right. Yeah. And to me, I'm a real proponent of children. It's a real issue that's close to our heart, the innocence of children. And it pains me in the sense that Michelle didn't get to experience that in the way that God wanted it to happen. And so it leaves me that much more vigilant in a sense as a parent for our children and other children. And you touched on it, Dale. To me, there's two elements. There's what we do as parents to protect and safeguard our children, things that we can not orchestrate, but navigate to help set up boundaries and things like that. You touched on them, accountability. For, as you mentioned, with Michelle and I's situation, I was kind of ignorant when our children were very young of what had happened. So when we were around her offender, her dad, I was unaware. Now, I think luckily God gave me a sense of responsibility for my children that you want to do smart things. You tell them don't run with scissors, don't cross the street without looking both ways. But I was always, I could always want to have this feeling that I wanted to protect my children, put them in the best situations with who they spend time with, the kids that they hung around, situations they may have been put in. And so, Dale, you've touched on that. And we want to do that. And God gives us a role to do that and a responsibility to do that. We should take it seriously because we're training up the next generation and we want to train them in the ways that God wants to honor so that, hopefully down the road, we've done our part through God and they come back to that in a sense in the way they carry on those things and the way they look at God and the things that they value. The other aspect is, as you mentioned, Faith, when do you tell your kids? And, for ours, when Michelle was able to finally see the counselor, through that, share what had happened in her life with me. And then it became an element of when do we tell our children? Because this person is still, in a sense, part of our life. We don't see them anymore, but they are still out there. The kids are going to have questions. So how do you handle that? And I think much like each couple's relationship and journey is going to be different, it's going to be different for every family dynamic of when and how you tell your children. I'm empathetic based on my history of what you don't tell children with my mother. I can understand and rationalize why you don't tell children certain things at certain ages. So I can certainly empathize and sympathize with parents that are struggling with when do I tell my child what is going on and with sexual abuse. So there's that element that is important. And when we finally told our kids, we were very, I would consider, open with it. And not necessarily going into details, of course, but just trying to be an open book and transparent because they're going to have questions. Whatever age they are, they're going to, in their minds, are going to formulate questions that you have to be ready to answer. And those are awkward conversations. And so I'm not sure if maybe in previous podcasts, Michelle has shared our purple chair that we have. When our kids were younger, they could come into our room at any point and sit in that chair and ask us questions about life. And so there were times that this particular issue came up, and we were transparent as much as we could be. And so I think it's important that parents are honest with their children and try and share as much as they can and answer the questions they have. Because as I've been told by many friends, when your kids have questions, they're going to find a way to get that question answered. And what better resource other than reading God's word, having the Holy Spirit work through them, but to have that question answered through their parents who are trying to guide them in the ways that the Lord wants and the correct ways. And so that's an important element to it as well. And it's just going to be different for every family dynamic. But the important thing is the children at some point have to know. And so, it's God's leading at that point of how you do that.
Yeah, and our kids were young. So the youngest was 3 and the oldest was 8 when I told Anthony my story. And the purple chair actually became probably a big deal around that time.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I wanted for the kids was a place where they could come tell us whatever they wanted to say. And it needed to be a safe place. It needed to be a place where they knew they were not going to get in trouble. They were not going to be dismissed. Like, you have our full attention. We believe everything that you tell us. Nothing bad's going to happen. You can say whatever you need to say in this chair. And we stuck by that. So even if they sat down and told us something they did that was wrong, in that moment, we don't, react. We don't address it. We let them say their piece, and then we have a conversation later, get on the same page, and then come back to them with, this is what we're going to do or how we're going to do it. But I just thought it was really important for a child to feel, because I know how hard it is to come to someone and say it. It was hard for me to tell my counselor. It was hard for me to tell my husband. How is a child going to open their mouth and say that when there's so much fear embedded in that? There's been so much manipulation. And so that was the big thing about the purple chair. And if you can take away anything from that, it's create a safe place where your child can tell you, because it's hard to tell. And then the other thing is, if they do say things, to not react like, why didn't you tell me? Or what are you talking about? Like, you have to remain calm. And I think the purple chair was a reminder for me to remain calm and to let them speak and to listen, whatever that might be. And the other thing is, for our youngest, I think it was the hardest because they had no concept of why we went no contact. And so they would, repeatedly ask, like, why aren't we seeing them anymore? Why aren't we going? And then I'll never forget being in the car. I know where I was, what stoplight we were at. And he said something like, why can't we go? And the oldest or the middle, I can't remember which one it was, but they looked over and they were like, I think it was the middle, said, shh, please don't talk about him. You're going to make mom cry. Because I could not help that every time my son said that, it crushed me. And while I will tell you that it is crushing to bring these kind of things into the light when it comes to family, it's necessary, because generationally, it's never going to change if someone doesn't stand up and say, no more. I'm not denying it. I'm not going to act like it never happened. We're not going to just move on. Because when you go back, if you listen to the last episode, and I talked about dissociating unwillingly, not even realizing I was doing it. And when I talked about the sense of panic and fear of safety that I had. Now, imagine trying to operate as a mom where I'm trying to helicopter my children by myself because I have not let my husband into the light. He doesn't even realize that there's an issue. I'm not even fully acknowledging that there's an issue. I just know that I have this huge responsibility to keep my kids safe. And the only way I can do that is to be with them all the time. He would tell you that we would go on anniversary trips or dinners, and we would have it set up for someone to keep them. And I would say, let's just bring the kids. I'm not going to have fun if we don't bring the kids. It'll be so much better with them there. Let's just bring them. And I would convince him, because I knew I wouldn't be able to enjoy myself if I had no idea what was happening to my children. So if you are a survivor and you are working in that framework and something happens that triggers you and you dissociate, then what? Like if you're missing things or things maybe are happening or something's going on and you're not acknowledging it. So it's really important just to bring it into the light. And how you tell your kids, how much you tell your kids, that's going to be up to each child and what they can handle. I think for the youngest, it started with he's really busy. Things are, we're busy, they're busy, and just left it at that. And then as he got older and would ask more questions, I remember the oldest, the 8-year-old, probably when he was 9 or 10, it wasn't right away. It was after a period of healing. He came home from school one day. Anthony wasn't even home yet. He met me at the door and he's like, I need you to tell me what happened to you. I need you to tell me what he did to you. And I'm like, I'm not ready to have that conversation. And he said, then I'm not getting off this couch until you tell me. I need to know. And I was like, well, can we wait until Dad gets home? And he's like, I want to know, Mom. Just tell me. Just tell me. And looking back on that, imagine what was going through his little mind that he was creating the worst of worst. I mean, this is awful and it's the worst in my mind, but I don't know what he was thinking. So kids are smart and kids, they can figure things out. They can sense things and they're very much aware of their environment and their surroundings. And so at some point, I think telling him the truth, and I didn't, like Anthony said, I didn't go into detail. I just said that I was abused as a child and he did very inappropriate things with me that he never should have done that are wrong. And so, I mean, I just kept it basic and simple. And he was then able to make sense of, then this makes sense. Mom's hurting, he hurt Mom. And now this makes sense. I still think it's earth shattering, because a huge world safety, like the world is not safe and people that you love have been violated. And how did they get violated? Like, how does that happen in a family dynamic? And so they have to make sense of all of that. And it's hard. But one of the things that motivates me or inspires me is generational trauma is real. It happens. It's going to pass on and pass on. But generational healing is real too. And I've heard people say that before. It's not a quote that's mine. I don't know who the originator is, but basically we can either allow the trauma to keep happening or we can say no more and start the process of healing. Because my kids experienced me as a mom prior to healing, I'm sure that, I would be different today if I could start over and parent them from birth. I would be completely different because I've had more healing. But I think that starting that process of healing, whether you start it, your kids are grown or your kids are in the crib, that process of healing is going to have a domino effect, just like the horror has a domino effect. But you get to decide which domino do you want to knock over? The one that's going to create a lasting legacy of harm and horror, or one that's going to create a lasting legacy of healing and hope. And that's the decision that we have to make.
And a couple of quick things come to mind, Michelle, when you're talking. The first one is, and I heard this a long time ago, and I don't even remember the context, but people are able to process the truth better than not knowing a situation. And so even though the truth is really, really hard, but you can process that, you can work with that. But just knowing maybe something really bad happened or something is wrong, but not having information, you can't process that. And so it's important for us, and you used the word necessary a few minutes ago, and I think that's really important for anyone watching or listening to this podcast. Healing is not easy. Healing is very painful. And, I saw that in Faith's healing journey, and she'll share that in her healing journey. She cried more after she began the healing journey than before, but it's necessary if you're going to find healing. It's a necessary part of the journey. Part of my thinking is here, we're talking about telling our children and how that's going to impact them. I can see where people might say, well, it's better for them not to know at all. And so I think a lot of times we don't let our children know information that it's important for them to have. So it is necessary. It's not easy. It's going to be painful. Once abuse happens, there are no winners in the process. It's just what is the best course forward, and having our children prepared, and we help them through that healing journey, help them process what's happened, even if it didn't impact them necessarily directly. They weren't the ones abused, but they're going to have to process the knowledge that maybe mom was abused or maybe dad was abused. That does impact them. But knowing the information, telling them, preparing them, helping them through is the best path forward.
And I think too, letting them be angry, letting them express their emotions. My kids were more angry at my dad than I was. I mean, they had a harder time forgiving him than I did, because it's harder to forgive somebody that hurt somebody that you love than it is to forgive somebody that hurts yourself. It's, if you hurt me, I can get over it, but if you hurt my kids, then you're going to have to deal with a lot of anger. And I think that that's where my kids were. They were very angry that their grandfather was not the man they thought he was, and that he was a man that hurt somebody that they loved. And it was very hard for them to get over that. And they never called him grandpa after that. They called him by his first name because he didn't deserve their respect. And I let them make that decision. They didn't have to call him grandpa anymore. And to them, I think they lost their grandparents that day. And it was hard for them. And I think they're still dealing with it.
Right. And one of the, things that come with this sometimes is no contact and going no contact. And I think some people may not understand that, or think that that's not being fair, or that's not being kind, or whatever the case may be. And it's not like Anthony and I talked about it. It was like, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go no contact. It's just, once you confront, they have an option. I mean, they can respond however they want to respond, but then you have to decide, what are you going to do with that response, right? And so in our original confrontation, Anthony made it very clear that Michelle needs space. Michelle needs time to heal. Michelle is going to be taken care of, but we need space. So don't reach out to her on social media. Don't call her. Don't visit her. So he set up clear boundaries. And then we did say, but if you want to send a note or something through the mail, you can do that. And the reason behind that is I can decide if I want to open a letter. I can decide if I'm in the right frame of mind, if I'm in a healthy spot to read a note. But to show up at my doorstep or show up on my cell phone, that could send me into a hard place. And so that's how it started, was just needing space. But now it's been 11 years of no contact. And, that's 11 years of a lot. A lot has happened in 11 years that I'm sure I don't know about, that he doesn't know about. And it's not that we're not open to reconciliation and restoration. It's just, we can't force that. And we can't make that happen.
And there is an element of hope. And one of the things from my story as a kid with my mother's passing is it tore a family apart. And I did not have anything to do with my mother's family for 30 years. And finally, one day out of the blue, one of my aunts called me and apologized for how my mother's family had reacted to her death in relation to my father and their two grandchildren and children, nieces and nephew. And it took 30 years for them to reach out and allow a sense of reconciliation. So there is hope that can occur. We don't know what God's timeline is for how things get resolved in family dynamics. And when reconciliation comes, it is a two-way street. There is an opportunity for the offender to come forward and be repentant and really show genuine remorse and be held accountable, so that there could be even a level of trust that can go back into the relationship. And so it works both ways. And in our dynamic, it's not there yet, but I have seen in my own personal life things come to fruition after certain periods of time. And so sometimes it just takes a long time, but as Michelle mentioned, each day that passes, is an opportunity that's been missed for growth and healing between everyone involved. Like you said, Dale, there's no winners here. The only way that there's a real winner is when reconciliation, trust can be rebuilt. And through that, I think God is glorified if it's done the right way. But so there is hope. And so if people are listening to this, there's all sorts of dynamics that can be at work. And I would just tell you to stay encouraged as parents. Keep at it. Keep the communication open with your kids. At some point, they're going to be grown adults who are going to be able to have the opportunity to make their own decisions about who they may or may want to interact with. But as parents, we can only provide information and support and love and be honest with them. So,
Yeah, and it's important to set safe boundaries to keep our relationship with our mates safe and also our children. And if the offender is not a safe person, then cutting off contact is a good option that may need to be done. And it doesn't mean that we're being unforgiving or unloving. It's the consequences of a behavior. And when they accept the responsibilities and accept boundaries, then they may have an opportunity to have a safe interaction. And you would have to set that up with boundaries. You'd never let your kids go with them one-on-one. But if there's true repentance and accountability, then there may be reconciliation down the line.
But healing has to take place first. And you
Yes.
cannot heal when you're constantly being triggered by
Right,
the person who repeatedly harmed you.
And that's part of the healing process, is dealing with that. You're finally dealing with what this person has stolen, and you need space. You need to not have to interact with them so that you can heal.
Because there's also that level of manipulation and brainwashing that has taken place. So until you have separated yourself from that, it's hard to even recognize it and to see it at work until you've taken that break and you've taken that space. So I know that, some people have a bad thought about no contact, but it is necessary. It is necessary for healing.
It is. And for safety for our kids.
Absolutely.
It's necessary.
Absolutely.
So this has been really interesting, in-depth topic. And thank both of you guys for coming on and sharing from your perspective the impact that our abuse has had on our family, on our relationships. We hope this podcast is a source of comfort and inspiration for those who are struggling with the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and healing.
Please be sure to subscribe and check out our show notes for more information. See you next time on Conversations of Hope with Faith and Michelle.